I'm Alejandro. I'm on the AEM security team, and this is my first time here in adaptTo, so I'm very happy to be here and also very happy to share the stage here with Angela.
Hello, I'm Angela. I have been here 13 years ago in the security stone age, so we made a lot of progress, or as Jörg put it, we are more opinionated nowadays, but I would like to add to that, we also have a lot more empathy. So with that, let me get into, how does that work? Yeah, right. So the reason for this talk is we want to give you a little bit of insights from what we see on a daily basis, what customers are struggling with, what our fellow AEM engineers are struggling with, and ultimately we want to give you the chance to build AEM setups that are properly secured with an access control setup that is maintainable. So this is super critical. And essentially this adds to what has been said in the redirect talk just before. You start your project and you think it's all easy and it will easily grow out of hands and you end up with a setup that is neither secure nor maintainable. So clarity over chaos. This should be our mantras. We want you to be intentional about what kind of access control setup you actually need in your AEM instance, how you want to secure it, what kind of roles you have. And we want to give you in this talk the tools and tips and tricks on how to actually design and invest in your access control setup and make sure you build it up front mindful and with intention instead of ending up in despair, debugging a setup and then reaching out to us because you no longer understand what you're having. Ultimately, when you follow these best practices, you will get an AEM access control setup that is fast and secure. So there is not secure or fast, this can go together. So Alejandro and I, we spent a lot of time and we were super excited to have this talk. And then we realized we have way too much material. We could just essentially take over adaptTo. So we reduced the scope. We extracted 3 key principles that we want to share with you. So 3 principles for security and performance. Least privilege, just grant what is needed. Principle as a principle, and simple and positive. So we want to keep those in mind, and we will show you a lot of examples what we mean with that.
Yeah, less privilege. I think this is the most common known principle in security. It is just grant what you needed, no less, no more than that. So in the scope of AEM, when we talk about this, we talk about this just grant what's needed to your users. So here we can see this, I think most of us, we can see that we are being there. Like there's something that is not working or something that you don't know what the user will need. So we'll end with creating this JCR all for users. You know that in case of any malicious user, this could be like a good recipe for disaster. So our suggestion is just, as said, is just we have to grant these permissions, just have this reduced scope of privilege that you have to share. Also, in addition to the grant what's needed, it's also important to know that you have to be aware of grant where is needed. You know that the same. If you have a user that is able to access everywhere in the content, this can cause a disaster on your security setup. You will end with vulnerabilities, you can add with privilege escalations, things like that. So this is also important to bear in mind when you are talking about less privilege in the context of AEM. Next, we want to talk about this principle as principle. It's a kind of a bit of tongue twister, you know. But once it is important to know this something, that as soon as you have this in mind, it is important that we will help you to understand and to achieve a better security setup in your instance. Before diving in, I think it's important to show what the principle is, just to set the common ground for everyone. So principles is a representation of an entity that has a name. A principal can be, I don't know, could be a login ID, could be a user, could be a group, but also users and groups can have an AEM have a principal. But be aware that not only users and groups have principals. You can have a concept of principal like everyone. Everyone could be a principal even when there's no group created in AEM. The concept of principals is important because its authorization operates over as principals. The principals are resolved upon logging. The principals are cached into the session, and principals are stored during the lifetime of the session object, but we will go over that a little bit later. So let's start with some code. Yep. This is something that maybe is common for everyone, or maybe everyone have seen this. Here we have a way to check if the user is allowed, a session is allowed or not, by resolving the groups or resolving the users. And then we add this to the authorized member. We have these variants like user member of group get members. You can see that this is valid or this is working, but this is hijacking the authorization in multiple ways. For example, we have the principles that is assuming that the principles of the permission evaluation is always done by group membership, which by default, in the implementation by default, this is not completely true. They are assuming that you are working with an airbag solution, which is not by default there. Also, you are here with this is allowing, you are skipping some built-in constraints. For example, what happens if you are trying to access a resource that is hidden by the repository or is securing in other parts. Also, in addition to that, you are also assuming that the principle that the principle of the groups is giving the permissions, which is maybe is not completely true. I mean, they have like the set of, you are assuming that the set of permissions are calculated here, but maybe the principles are calculated during the logging on the instance. And the last one, I almost forgot about the last one, you are hijacking the permissions here. We are assuming that the groups, if you have the permission on the group, that you are going to have access to the resource, which this could be not true. You can be in that group, but maybe then later on your permission setup, you don't have access to the resource. So you are, well, ending with a security problem if you are using a service session, or you are having an error when you are trying to access a resource that is not there. Also, using this member, we are skipping some of the performance that were done for the principal resolution. Well, we talked about this before, like this session, and also about how you check the permissions. So if you really need to check on which principle, your user have, it's better to rely on this method from the JavaScript session. The getBound principles, as I mentioned before, the principles are resolved upon logging, are stored in a cache, are stored in the session during the lifetime of this object, and are stored in a OKJCR bound principles variable, I think it is, yes? And so from here, we are just not relying on this resolution. You are also adding the principles that maybe are not coming from the user manager. For example, this could be like you have the bound principles that are added for other principal providers that you have, not only the ones that comes from the user management. In case you want to do some explicit permission evaluation, instead of having the checking on the membership for a group, there are alternatives. So you can do this kind of explicit permission where you can use this privilege collection that was created to perform repeated evaluation on the privileges. Think, for example, on a render condition that you have to continue to checking if the user has privileges over resources. So the way to get it is you get the privilege collections through the access control manager, and from there you check this collection over and over, and you have the benefits of having this cache and having this repeated evaluation, and you don't have to go over the member of or on the group's members, which is very costly, by the way. Away from also, in addition to the explicit permission, if you have to do it, there's another way to do it, where you can do like implicit permission evaluation. I think most of the people can are doing this. It's like you are using the resources that are attached to the session or are attached to the resource, to the request, sorry. So you have this resource resolver where you can get the path, and here you have all the benefits on the evaluation. You have all the benefits of getting the security evaluated on the resources. You ensure that you are using the resource that you have permissions to use. Also, in addition to that, you have the session bound to the request. Here, the same. You have to ensure that you have the permissions to access the resource that you needed. Worth to mention, or we like to mention about these methods like get node or null or get property or null, because using this method, you gain a lot of performance improvement against the version of known, checking these no null versions. And I think, yeah, one thing I like to mention is this principles concept is important that you have it in mind, because it is used across all the security. So we will have some talks about the security, and this principle concept maybe appears over and over on this time. Maybe it's not implicitly mentioned, but the principle concept, it is important to have it because, yeah, something with authorization and security that is always there.
Thank you. So I just want to give a shout out to Jörg, because he is the reason why we have that privilege collection. It was actually a performance issue in AEM, and he reached out to me and said, Angela, what can we do about that? And the reason why we have the Jackrabbit session get banned principles code is actually because of Konrad. Where are you? Thanks a lot for adding that method. It wasn't me or Alejandro adding that. Yeah. It was actually coming from the community. Why don't we have this as public API? So whatever we are presenting here, this would not be possible without the input that we get from the people in the community, from people like Jörg and others that are also working on customers and then reach out to the security team. So we come to the third principle, simple and positive. And if you realized I got rid of my earrings, so the sound should be better, but I look less cute, so I apologize for that. So simple and positive. What we mean, we want to have it as easy as possible, as readable as possible, as maintainable as positive, and we want to have it positive. So I admit, if I have one regret in all the things I did in security, those deny entries I will regret forever. So, the first example that we have in the simple and positive group is a regular case that we see when we look at customer instances. We try to condense that into more or less simplified version where you have a regular node, and then you have a subtree below, and in the very leaves of that subtree, you have a public folder and you have a secret folder. And just for the sake of the example, let's envision we have 3 different groups. We have editors, we have readers, we have an HR group, and obviously those are getting to read the secret information. And we have that public that should be for everyone or for all registered users, depending on the use case. So this is our simplified setup. It's simplified. I'm saying simplified because what we see in reality is that these kind of structures and the corresponding access control setup then is distributed over multiple subtrees or over multiple levels of the hierarchy. So you might have then one access control list with 1,000 entries on the regular folder, and we have another access control list somewhere on folder 2, and then on public and in secret and on public 2 and sub-public 3. So it gets infinitely more complex, but for the sake of the argument, we just simplified it to illustrate what we actually mean by simplifying it. So this is the access control setup we made up for this complex folder structure, which looks pretty simple. So the person that set this up decided to have on the /regular node first starting with a deny everyone. So looks reasonable, but when I look at such an access control list, I say, why is there a deny for everyone? Is this really needed? Because out of the box, by default, the content repository and the default authorization implementation doesn't grant anything. So out of the box, so by default, there should be nothing. So the question then, it comes from my mind, is this deny everyone, is this needed? It might it might be, but it's always good to just check, make sure you really need it. Don't just add it just for the sake of having it in order to be sure that you're having the right access control set up. I would rather recommend add a test case, make sure you have continuous testing for your permission setup to make sure you don't screw it all the way while you're evolving it. The next two lines allow the readers, they have read access, the editor group, they have read and write access. That looks sensible. So in the next block, there comes an allow for HR granting read access with a restriction on the secret subfolder. So I will come back to that rep-glop pattern. Just two things to mention. Why is there the double wildcard at the beginning? And what is that with the wildcard at the very end? So what is if someone creates a subtree that is called secret2 or secret sibling? So that glop pattern would also match there. And then comes a deny for the readers group on the same tree. So why is this troublesome? The order is off. If someone is member of readers and HR, access is denied. What happens to the editors group? If someone is in readers and editors, no more access. But if someone is just in the editors group, they actually still can read that stuff. So you have an editor, that editor can read all your secret HR files. And then we have an allow for readers on the public folder. Again, what about the editors? Can they read there? No, it's just assuming that everyone that is a reader is also in the editors group, or the other way around, an editor is always in the readers group. And what about everyone? So we say it's public. Shouldn't everyone have access there? So this is kind of setups that we see all the time, and what we realize is our customers and our fellow engineers, they get so desperate once they have this set up, they say, oh my God, I no longer know what is going on here. I will just grant JCR for everyone. I put everyone in the administrators group. Oh my God, finally it works. But it works, but you actually have opened a massive security hole. So what else could we do instead? And this, I admit that what I'm presenting here is more of an idealistic version. It might not, in AEM, there might be constraints. What would be simplified and positive? First, what I would go and do is I would move that secret folder out of the regular folder. This is clearly something that is not part of, when you think about the threat boundary, this secret folder is not part of the regular, of the same threat level as your regular folder. So I would make sure that the secret folder that should only be accessed goes separately and is stored away from the stuff that is public or for readers and editors in general. And so I have it here, a separate access control list for /secret, just for the sake of the argument, and allow HR read access there. We don't grant it for the readers, we don't grant it for the editors, and we don't have to extra deny for readers and everyone again. On our regular folder, we keep the allow readers, we keep the allow for the editors, and then we just allow for everyone in the public subtree folder. So you see, I changed the restriction rep-glop, I changed that to rep subtrees. And it looks actually a lot simpler. Also, we don't have to then wonder what happens if someone is a reader and the editor, what happens if someone is just the editor, and as you know, everyone is everyone. So this goes easily. And it's exactly what Alejandro said. Even if you did tiny secret, if you drop the everyone group, there is still a everyone principle that is available in the AEM installation, and it will be packed to all this. Upon login, it will be added to all the principal set. So, did I miss something? Anyway, I think I covered it all. We come to the next example, which is what I just promised before, our beloved glob restriction. So, this is actually coming, I extracted that from a real use case. We had a customer reaching out because they said, when we log in with admin, it takes 1 minute to render the page. As soon as the user logs in, it takes 5 minutes. This is unbearable. Yes, it's unbearable. What is going on? Can you help us? We see in our stack traces, it's always that rep glob evaluation. And then I tell hand over your access control setup. I will take a look. Actually, it was Jose that was investigating that customer. And so we find that glob pattern, slash wildcard, slash wildcard, slash wildcard, slash wildcard, and then at the end, the T1 wildcard. They don't have that once. They had that like repeatedly. And I said, okay, yeah, but that extra wildcard, this is just good for nothing. And what about that T1 wildcard? I just mentioned it before. This will actually match T11. Is this really your intention? So we fixed it, and the performance degradation went down from 5 minutes to 2 minutes for a regular user. Still not lightning speed. I mean, I would still say this is too slow, but I'm sure there was more stuff in there where we could have to improve performance if we continued to investigate. And the customer at least was relieved that he had no, it was like in a range of magnitude closer to what they had experienced with the admin user. So if you want to fix that with rep glob, you end up actually with 2 entries. You have to have one first to start with a single wildcard, then you have at the end the T1 to make sure you can access that node, and then you need a separate entry to cover the subtree of T1, which is not nice, but okay, you can do it. But actually, that rep subtree is really handy, much easier to use. I personally find it much easier to read. It will just match everything content tenants T1. So, yeah. And it's also faster. I measured it. So the next example, simplifying the principal set. This is important because, as Alejandro said, upon login, you get the subject with all the principles that can be resolved for your user that is accessing the AEM instance. And we see that those principal sets get massive, huge. And for the permission evaluation in the default implementation will verify for all the principles if there is something to do with, if there is some access control setup that is matching those principles. And the bigger the set gets, the slower it gets. So drop redundant groups. This goes again, what has been said about the redirect, same patterns, same ideas behind. Make sure you keep control of what you're having, measure it, monitor it. If you see that you have redundant groups, get rid of those. If you have redundant workflows, you have redundant projects, you have redundant DAM collections that you no longer use, clean up your AEM instance. And usually we recommend for external users that get synchronized from an external identity provider, we recommend never to put those in a local group. And if possible, this might not always be possible, avoid the duplication from a local group and an external group. So avoid having to put an external group in a local group. There might be cases, for example, CUGs with SAML integration on publish, where you want to replicate your CUGs from author to publish there. Today, at least, we don't have a good way to avoid the duplication of local group and external group. But in general, we would recommend, especially on author, to avoid that. So what is the best way to do that? Clean up group membership, as I said, avoid unnecessary indirection if it's not needed. And we have a new feature in the repo init. Thanks to Julian Sedding, who implemented that. There is no need to actually create or wait for the synchronization to happen before you can actually make the access control setup. You can do that with repo init today. In cloud service, this is already deployed. There is a special option that says ignore missing principles. And as long as you know the principal name of your external group, you can set up that access control entry and not even have to create the group manually in repo init upfront. You just create the access control setup without and leaving the synchronization of the group to the sync mechanism. So, simplifying redundancy. This was the complicated stuff. Now we can have a few more fun examples, but it gets easier. Simplifying redundancy. you want to avoid having access control entries that are not needed. It might look as innocent, but it's actually, first, you lose track of what you have. If you don't clean up that stuff, you get confused by what you're having. You look at one part and you get misled. You think, oh, I'm having granted read access on content, and probably the user doesn't, or the group doesn't have access on other places, but you actually had a read access on /. So you actually granted read access everywhere. So again, and this goes back to what Alejandro was saying, be mindful of what you're granting and where you are granting your permissions. And the simplified version would just be set principal ASPL for this read service, allow read on /. If you read it if you need the read access on the whole repository, obviously. If you need it if it's just a content reader service, you only grant it on /content. And here again, I think this is part of our best practices. Make sure you, especially for service users, make sure you name your service users to what they are actually supposed to do. Don't call this write service when it's actually just a reading service. So, and there's another one, simplify redundancy, set ACL for administrators. We actually see this a lot. What does that mean? You want to deny JCR all on secret for the administrators group. Looks okay, yeah? Administrators shouldn't have access there. The problem is, I just call it administrators because this is default. All principals that are listed in the administrative access configuration have full access everywhere. Permission evaluation is simply omitted. So if you set up this access control setup, you might feel cute about it and cool and say, yeah, I did the right thing. I actually made it more secure, but actually it's just ignored. This creates, we call this a false sense of security. So make sure you understand what you're doing. Make sure you really test what you're having. So if you would have a test for that, you would wonder, okay, but it's not working. So then we get the tickets, permission evaluation is not working. Yeah, it's not working because it's never evaluated. And in this case, we would say drop without replacement.
Yeah, we saw the principles that we want to share. As Angela mentioned at the beginning, there are more principles, there are more best practices that you can follow to ensure that you have a nice and clean setup. Here, with the least privilege, we saw that, yeah, this is over and over. Don't assume that JCR should be used. That's a clear sign that something is wrong with your configuration and that you should go over it. With the principles, the same. We saw that the principal concept is very important on the AEM. It is important to bear it in mind. It's important that it's not only users and groups that is granting you access. There are other sources, there are other ways to get you a principal like everyone. And with simple and positive, yeah, think on the default behavior of the AEM, think on what you are doing, and also that this is mentioned in the redirect talk, and Angela mentioned a couple of times, is clean your setups from time to time. Be ensured that you have a clean setup. Be ensured that you remove what is not needed. If you have content that should be removed, just go and clean after yourself.
And test it. Yes. And by the way, those principles, we made them look very AEM specific, and obviously our examples that we showed, they are specific to AEM, especially cloud service, the AEM, the monolith, as we like to call it. But in my opinion, those principles, they apply also if you have another system. So even if you go for an RBAC or an ABAC access control setup, if you go to a different system, if you go to a different content management system, if you go to edge delivery, those principles will still apply in some form or shape.
The last word that we want to share is, yeah, we want to hear from you. There are contributions that were mentioned by Angela, like George or Conrad. We want to hear from you. We are here. We are not working on an aisle. We want to hear what you need, what you expect from the security team. So please, as soon as you want, you can reach us.
We are here 3 days, and it's not just the two of us, it's also Jose and Nicola, so we showed up here with all security force. Thank you very much.
thank you for that amazing session. There are a couple of questions for you. First one, which has a lot of votes, are, do you have a recommended approach for testing permissions?
Yes.
Expand.
Yes, we have.
So what we do internally is we are having server-side tests, and I have been pushing to make those available in general and also in cloud service. Apart from that, I would just recommend to have scripts that test it or have internal testing framework that you set up to and verify that the effective permissions are there. So there is always there is a lot of confusion between the access control setup that you see in the content and what that means and how that turns out to be effective. And I have to explain that over and over, that the effective permission setup might be different than the local access control setup.
How would you propose to grant access to external groups without making the group a member of an inbuilt group, like contributors? Is there a standard recommendation?
So if you need the contributor group access control setup, I would add the group, the external group to contributors, if this is what you need. Particularly for the contributor group, there is in cloud service, actually, a cloud service out of the box is configured that everyone is members of contributors out of the box. So in the IMS configuration, so on also. So you don't need to add anybody to the contributor group. This is automatically granted. And with the dynamic membership that we have rolled out in cloud service, in the meantime, this is actually done without adding anybody directly to the group. It's done with the auto membership configuration, which is much faster and doesn't require the resolution of those reference nodes.
Great, thank you. One more question.
And you can add with repo init, actually, if it's not contributors but your custom group, you can actually add members to a group with repo init without the member being present. It works.
Yeah, just one last one, probably. Yeah, so is all of these things that you just showed already usable by Sling's resource resolver, like the get bound principles and so on? Or is it just bound to Jackrabbit API?
So the bound principle is just in Jackrabbit API. It's not on the Sling resource resolver API. If you need that, please make a patch. Contributions welcome. I'm also a Sling committer, so I can help you there.
Yes, and if you have questions around that, there's the Meet the Sling Experts panel, so maybe that's the way to go.
Yeah.
Great, so thank you again for your great session, and a big round of applause for Angela.
Thank you very much.